Take a look at the shirt you're wearing right now. Ever stop and think about the journey it took to get to you? It's a story that literally wraps around the globe, and, it has this hidden chapter we almost never see. It's real environmental cost. So, let's dive into the true story of our clothes. So, let's just start right there. What is the real impact of that t-shirt? Well, the global apparel industry, it turns out, is a huge contributor to both water and air pollution. I mean, from the insane amount of water needed to grow the cotton to the chemicals used to get that perfect color, the footprint is just massive. You see, the true cost of our clothes often isn't what's on the price tag. It's what economists call an environmental externality. Basically, it's a cost that's paid by other people, by communities and ecosystems, especially in places with weaker regulations, where a lot of our clothing gets made. Just think about it. Dyeing fabrics, tanning leather, these processes can release this whole cocktail of chemicals straight into local rivers.
But things are definitely starting to change. And what's really driving it, which is so interesting, isn't just government rules anymore. It's coming from us, from you and me as consumers. And it's coming from investors who are finally waking up to the fact that a company's environmental record is directly tied to its long-term financial stability. All this pressure is forcing brands to take a hard look at their own supply chains.
Okay, so if you're going to fix a problem, you have to understand it first, right? And the fashion supply chain, oh man, it's a maze. It's this giant, sprawling web of farms, mills, factories, and dye houses that's mostly invisible to us. So for these companies to even begin to manage their environmental impact, they first have to figure out who all the players even are.
The first step in making sense of this maze is to break it into a couple of manageable chunks. In the industry, they basically split everyone into two big groups. You've got your Tier 1 suppliers, and then everyone else they call beyond Tier 1. And trust me, understanding the difference between these two is absolutely key to finding out where the biggest environmental problems are hiding.
All right, let's start with Tier 1. These are the folks a fashion brand works with directly. Think of the factory that gets the big rolls of finished fabric, cuts out the patterns, and actually sews them together into the t-shirt. They're the final assemblers in the process.
Now, if you take one step back from there, you get to the supplier's suppliers. This is what's known as beyond Tier 1. And these are the facilities that make the raw materials. The mills weaving the fabric, the tanneries prepping the leather, and so importantly, the dye houses. This is where those really water-heavy, chemical-intensive processes happen. This is where so much of the environmental action is.
So how in the world do you actually measure the environmental impact in a system this complicated? Well, you start by following one of the most important resources, water. Specifically, you track wastewater pollution because it gives you a really clear, measurable number that tells you how a factory is doing.
And the rule for tracking this is actually pretty simple. A supplier is considered in compliance if the water they release meets all the local legal limits for chemicals and, this is important, they haven't gotten any violation notices. It's pretty black and white, really. You either pass or you fail.
Now, I know, it might sound like complicated math, but the calculation is super simple. And by turning these raw numbers into a percentage, brands can suddenly compare the performance of hundreds, even thousands of different factories. Let's just walk through a quick example. Okay, first, you just count up the number of facilities that are following the rules. So in our little example here, let's say a brand has 80 Tier 1 factories that are totally compliant with their wastewater permits. Next, you need to know how many factories you're looking at in total. So for this brand, we'll say they work with a nice round number of 100 Tier 1 supplier facilities.
And here's the easy part. You just divide the number of good guys by the total number of guys. So 80 divided by 100 gives you an 80% compliance rate for your Tier 1 suppliers. Simple, right?
And this right here is where a simple percentage becomes an incredibly powerful tool. You can use it to compare different parts of your supply chain. So here you can see Tier 1 is at 80% compliance, but those beyond Tier 1 suppliers, the dye houses and mills, they're lagging a bit at 75%. This instantly tells a company exactly where they need to focus their attention and their resources.
But wastewater is only one piece of a much bigger puzzle. To get a really full picture, the industry uses a tool that's kind of like a comprehensive environmental report card for every single factory. It's called the Higg Facility Environmental Module, or just Higg FEM for short.
So the Higg FEM is this standardized self-assessment that factories fill out to score themselves on a whole bunch of environmental stuff. And because it's standardized, it means you can do a real apples-to-apples comparison across the whole industry. It doesn't matter if it's a tiny workshop or a gigantic factory complex.
And just look at how thorough this thing is. It goes way beyond just wastewater. It covers everything from a factory's energy use and greenhouse gas emissions to how it handles its trash and, super important, its entire system for managing chemicals. It really gives you a complete 360-degree view of a factory's environmental health.
Okay, so we've got all these percentages and these detailed assessments, but why does any of this actually matter? What do these numbers really do out in the real world? Because this isn't just some homework assignment for these companies. This data becomes a critical tool for making huge business decisions. It's the so what that turns these abstract scores into real money, real risk, and real accountability.
Let's look at how different people use this exact same information. An accountant? They're looking at it to figure out the financial risk of potential fines if a factory isn't compliant. An investor? They're using it to judge the company's risk, its reputation, and its overall ESG score. That's its environmental, social, and governance performance. And then an auditor comes in and uses this data to make sure what the company is saying is actually true. And that brings us to the bottom line, money. When a company can show that a high percentage of its suppliers have filled out the Higg FEM, it sends a really powerful signal to the market. It tells investors, hey, we've got a handle on our supply chain. We're managing our risk. And a stronger ESG profile makes them way more attractive to investors, which can directly impact their stock price and long-term value.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. These metrics, things like wastewater compliance and the Higg FEM, they take this massive, complicated, and usually invisible environmental problem, and they turn it into data that you can see, you can compare, and most importantly, that you can manage. It creates a common language for holding companies accountable. It lets us see who's just talking about sustainability and who's actually doing the work.
So, now that you know a little bit about how the industry is trying to measure its own impact, it kind of begs a bigger question. Armed with this knowledge, what does real environmental transparency from the brands you love and wear actually look like to you? It's something to think about the next time you pull on that favorite t-shirt.